The alarm bells rang through the corridors of the UES Defiance for the third time that week. Captain Jake Morrison pulled himself out of his chair and walked quickly to the bridge. His uniform was wrinkled and dirty. He had not changed clothes in 4 days. There was no time for such things when your ship was dying around you. "What is it this time?" Morrison asked as he reached his command chair. "Power grid failure in Section 7, sir," reported Communications Officer Lisa Grant. Her voice was tired. Everyone on the ship sounded tired these days. "Chief Walsh says he can fix it, but we'll need to shut down the gravity in that section for at least 6 hours. Morrison rubbed his eyes. Section 7 housed 3,000 people. 3,000. People who would have to float in zero gravity while they tried to sleep, eat, and take care of their children. But there was no choice. The Defiance was falling apart piece by piece, and they were still 2 weeks away from their destination. "Tell the chief to do what he needs to do," Morrison said. "And have Lieutenant Phillips prepare the medical bay. For injuries. People always get hurt when the gravity goes out. The Defiance had been humanity's most advanced warship 3 years ago. Now it looked like a floating junkyard. The hull was covered in scorch marks from plasma fire. 3 of the main engines were barely working. The ship's computer crashed, at least once a day. But it was still flying, and it still carried the last 50,000 humans in the universe." Morrison walked to the big window at the front of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere behind them, Earth was nothing but floating rocks and poisoned air. The Kithran Empire had made sure of that. The insect-like aliens had come without warning and destroyed everything humanity had built in just 6 months. The Defiance had been in deep space when Earth fell. Morrison and his crew had watched the news reports until the signals stopped coming. Then they had gathered every refugee ship they could find and started the long journey to New Geneva, humanity's furthest colony. It was supposed to be a safe place where humans could start over, but that was 3 years ago. 3 years of running on failing engines and recycled air. 3 years of rationing food and water. 3 years of watching people die from diseases that should have been easy to cure if they had proper medical supplies. "Captain," Lisa Grant called out. "I'm picking up something on the long-range sensors." Morrison turned around quickly. "What kind of something?" Lisa worked at her station for a moment. Her face was pale. "Energy signatures, sir. Big ones. And debris fields." Morrison felt his stomach drop. Energy signatures meant weapons fire. Debris fields meant destroyed ships. It meant the Kithrans had reached New Geneva before them. "How far out are we?" Morrison asked. 14 days. "At current speed," reported the navigation officer, a young man named Pete Collins. "But sir, if we push the engines harder, we might make it in 10 days. And if we push them too hard, we might not make it at all," said Chief Engineer Danny Walsh over the communication system. His voice came from somewhere deep in the ship's engine room. "These engines are held together with spare parts and prayers, Captain. Ask too much of them and they'll blow us all to pieces." Morrison closed his eyes and thought, if New Geneva was under attack, maybe they could help. The Defiance still had weapons, even if half of them did not work properly. Maybe they could make a difference. But if New Geneva had already fallen, then pushing the engines might just get them there faster so they could die with empty fuel tanks. "Captain," Lisa said quietly, "there's something else." "What?" "The energy signatures. They're not moving like battle patterns. They're more like construction work, or maybe mining operations." Morrison opened his eyes. "Are you sure?" "No, sir. The signals are very weak and there's a lot of interference, but it doesn't look like active combat." Morrison made his decision. "Pete, increase speed by 20%. Danny, I know the engines are barely holding together, but we need to get there faster." "You're going to kill us all." Danny's voice crackled over the speakers. "Maybe. But if New Geneva's still fighting, they need our help. And if it's already over, well, at least we'll know." Morrison walked back to his chair and sat down. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. They had been through so much together. Most of them had families among the refugees packed into the lower decks. They all knew that this might be their last chance to find a home. The next few days passed slowly. The ship shook more than usual as the engines worked harder. More systems failed. The water recycling plant broke down for 8 hours, leaving 40,000 people without clean water. A fire started in the food storage area and destroyed a week's worth of rations, but they kept flying toward New Geneva. Dr. Kate Phillips came to the bridge on the 10th day. She was the ship's chief medical officer, but she spent most of her time these days just trying to keep people alive in the overcrowded medical bay. "Captain, we need to talk," she said. Morrison looked at her tired face. Kate had been pretty once, but 3 years on a dying ship had aged her. Her hair was gray now, and her hands shook from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "What's wrong now?" Morrison asked. "It's not what's wrong. It's what's going to be wrong soon. We're running out of medicine. The air recycling system is working too hard with all these people on board, and we've got a new sickness spreading through Deck 15. "How bad?" 12. People in the medical bay already. Could be 50 by tomorrow if it spreads. Morrison looked around the bridge. Everyone was listening, even though they pretended to work at their stations. Bad news traveled fast on a ship, and people were already scared enough. "Do what you can, Doctor. We're almost there." Kate nodded and left the bridge. Morrison knew she would do everything possible to help the sick people. She always did. But there was only so much anyone could do with broken equipment and empty medicine bottles. On the 13th day, they finally got a clear look at the New Geneva system. "Captain," Lisa Grant shouted. "You need to see this." Morrison rushed to her station and looked at the display screen. What he saw made no sense. New Geneva was not destroyed. The planet looked better than ever. There were huge cities on the surface, bigger than any human city had ever been. Space stations floated in orbit around the planet, and they were enormous. Ships moved between the planet and the stations, but they were not like any human ships Morrison had ever seen. "Those aren't Kithrin ships," Pete Collins said, looking at his own screens, "but they're not ours either." "The energy signatures are definitely human," Lisa reported. "I'm picking up radio signals too. They're speaking English." Morrison stared at the screen. After 3 years of running and hiding after watching humanity's homeworld burn, they had finally reached their destination, and somehow, impossibly, New Geneva was not just alive but thriving. "Open a communication channel," Morrison ordered. "Yes, sir." Morrison took a deep breath. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Defiance carrying refugees from Earth. New Geneva, please respond." They waited. The bridge was completely quiet except for the sound of failing air recyclers and the distant hum of overworked engines. Then a voice came back, clear and strong. "UES Defiance, this is New Geneva Control. We've been waiting for you. Welcome home." Captain Jake Morrison stared at the communication panel. The voice from New Geneva Control sounded friendly, but something was wrong. The signal was too clear, too strong. After 3 years of broken equipment and failing systems, Morrison knew what good technology sounded like. This was better than good. This was perfect. "New Geneva Control, this is Captain Morrison," he said into the microphone. "We need immediate assistance. We have 50,000 refugees on board and our ship is failing." "We understand, Captain Morrison. Please reduce your speed and follow the escort ships to Docking Bay 7. Morrison looked around the bridge. "What escort ships?" Before anyone could answer, 3 ships appeared on their screens. They had not been there a moment before. The ships were sleek and silver, moving without any visible engines. Each one was twice the size of the Defiance. "Where did they come from?" asked Pete Collins, the navigation officer. "I don't know," Lisa Grant said, checking her sensors. "They just appeared. No engine signatures, no heat trails. It's like they materialized out of nothing." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. "Are they human ships?" "The design looks human, but the technology—" Lisa shook her head. "Captain, these ships are using power sources I've never seen before, and they're not showing up on half of our sensors." The 3 escort ships took positions around the Defiance. They moved smoothly, like they were floating on water instead of flying through space. Morrison had been in space for 20 years, and he had never seen anything move like that. Captain Morrison, came the voice from New Geneva Control. Please, follow the escort ships. They will guide you to safety. Morrison looked at his crew. They all looked as confused as he felt. But what choice did they have? The Defiance was falling apart, and they had nowhere else to go. Follow them, Morrison ordered. As they got closer to New Geneva, Morrison could see more details of the planet. The cities were huge, covering entire continents. Massive towers reached up into the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to hang in the air without any support. Ships moved between the planet and the orbital stations, but they were nothing like the cargo ships Morrison remembered from before the war. Captain, Lisa said quietly, I'm counting over 200 orbital stations, and some of them are bigger than the cities on Earth used to be. Morrison nodded. Before the Kithrin attack, humanity's biggest space station could hold maybe 10,000 people. These stations looked like they could hold millions. How long have we been traveling? Morrison asked. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days, Pete answered. And how long does it take to build a space station? A big one. At least 10 years, maybe 20. Morrison thought about this. When they left Earth, New Geneva had been a small farming colony with maybe 500,000 people. Now it looked like the most advanced human civilization in history. The escort ships guided them toward a docking bay that was built into one of the orbital stations. As they got closer, Morrison could see that the station was enormous. The docking bay alone was big enough to hold 50 ships the size of the Defiance. Captain? Danny Walsh's voice came over the communication system from the engine room. You need to see this. The escort ships are projecting some kind of field around us. It's holding our ship together. Morrison looked at the screen showing the outside of their ship. There was a faint blue glow around the Defiance's hull. As he watched, some of the damaged sections seemed to be repairing themselves. How is that possible? Morrison asked. I have no idea, sir. But our power levels are stabilizing and the hull breaches in Section 12 just sealed themselves. Morrison felt like he was dreaming. After 3 years of watching his ship fall apart, it was suddenly fixing itself. The docking bay doors opened, and the Defiance was pulled inside by invisible forces. Morrison could see people waiting for them on the docking platform. They looked human, but their clothes were strange. They wore uniforms that seemed to be made of light, and they moved with perfect coordination. Docking complete, announced Pete. All systems are stable. Morrison stood up from his chair. Lisa, you're with me. Pete, keep monitoring the situation. Danny, stay with the engines. Where are you going, Captain? Lisa asked. To find out what happened to humanity while we were gone. Morrison and Lisa walked through the corridors of the ship toward the main airlock. Along the way, they passed refugees who were looking out the windows at the docking bay. Children pressed their faces against the glass, amazed by what they saw. Adults whispered to each other, afraid to believe that they had finally found safety. At the airlock, Morrison stopped. Are you ready for this? Lisa nodded, but Morrison could see she was nervous. Captain, what if these people aren't really human? Then we'll deal with that when we have to. Right now, we need their help. The airlock opened and Morrison stepped onto the docking platform. The air was clean and fresh, better than any air he had breathed in 3 years. The gravity felt normal, but somehow more comfortable than the artificial gravity on the ship. A man in a silver uniform walked toward them. He looked to be about 40 years old, with short brown hair and calm, blue eyes. He moved with the confidence of someone who was used to being in charge. Captain Morrison, the man said, extending his hand. I'm Admiral Ryan Carter, Terran Colonial Defense Force. Welcome to New Geneva. Morrison shook the man's hand. Admiral Carter, I have to say this is not what we expected to find. Carter smiled. I imagine not. Please come with me. We have a lot to discuss. Carter led them through the docking bay and into a corridor that was wider and cleaner than anything Morrison had ever seen. The walls seemed to glow with their own light, and the floor felt soft under their feet. Admiral Carter, Morrison said as they walked, when we left Earth, New Geneva was a farming colony. What happened here? That's a long story, Captain, but the short version is that we survived. And then we thrived. They entered a room with a large table and chairs that seemed to be made of the same glowing material as the walls. Carter gestured for them to sit. 3 years ago, when the Kithrans attacked Earth, they also sent a fleet to New Geneva. Carter began. We weren't prepared for them, and we nearly lost everything. But we fought back, and we learned. Learned what? Lisa asked. That the universe is a dangerous place and that humanity needed to become stronger if we were going to survive. Carter touched the table, and images appeared in the air above it. Morrison saw pictures of battles in space, of human ships fighting against insect-like vessels that had to be Kithran. After we defeated the Kithran fleet here, we captured some of their ships and studied their technology. We learned how to make better weapons, better engines, better everything. Morrison watched the images change. He saw human cities growing larger and larger. He saw space stations being built in months instead of years. He saw ships that moved like the escort vessels that had guided them in. How long did all this take? Morrison asked. Carter looked at him with those calm blue eyes. Captain, how long do you think you were traveling? 3 years. According to our records, the UES Defiance left the Sol system 73 years ago. Morrison felt the room spin around him. That's impossible. You traveled through several unstable hyperspace corridors to avoid Kithran patrols. Time moves differently in hyperspace, especially when space is damaged by weapons fire. What felt like 3 years to you was actually 7 decades to the rest of the universe. Lisa grabbed Morrison's arm. Captain, that means everyone we knew is dead. Yes, Carter said gently. I'm sorry, but you're not alone. There are other refugee ships that made similar journeys. You're the last one we were waiting for. Morrison tried to process what he was hearing. 70 years. Everyone on Earth was gone. The war was over. And somehow, humanity had not just survived, but had become something incredible. What happened to the Kithrans? Morrison asked. Carter's expression changed. For a moment, his calm mask slipped and Morrison saw something cold and hard underneath. The Kithrans are extinct, Captain. We made sure of that. Morrison felt another chill. Extinct? They tried to destroy humanity. We returned the favor. It took us 40 years, but we hunted down every last one of them. Carter stood up from the table. But that's not the most important thing right now. What's important is getting your people settled and healthy. We have medical facilities that can help everyone on your ship. We have homes where they can live. We have jobs they can do. Morrison looked at Lisa, who was staring at the images still, floating above the table. Pictures of massive human cities and fleets of advanced ships. What about us? Morrison asked. What about the crew of the Defiance? That depends on what you want to do, Captain. This is a very different world than the one you left. We've changed a lot in 70 years. The question is whether you can change with us. Carter walked toward the door. Take some time to think about it. Your people are safe here. But before you make any decisions, there are some things you need to understand about what humanity has become. As Carter left the room, Morrison sat in his chair and stared at the glowing walls. Outside, his ship was being repaired by technology he did not understand. His people were being offered a new life in a world that seemed like paradise. But something about Admiral Carter's cold eyes made Morrison wonder what price humanity had paid for all this progress. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his guest quarters and looked down at the city of Hamilton spread out below. From this high up, he could see the entire planet. The cities stretched across continents like glowing webs. Ships moved between the ground and space in steady streams. Everything looked perfect, but something felt wrong. It had been 3 days since the Defiance arrived. The ship's refugees were being processed through medical centers and housing facilities. The sick were getting better with medicines that seemed to work like magic. The hungry were being fed food that tasted better than anything Morrison remembered from Earth. Everyone should have been happy, but Morrison could not shake the feeling that they had walked into something they did not understand. A knock came at his door. Come in. Admiral Ryan Carter entered, followed by a woman Morrison had not met before. She was tall and blonde, wearing the same silver uniform as Carter. Her eyes were the same cold blue. "Captain Morrison, I'd like you to meet Colonel Beth Harper, our cultural integration specialist. She's going to show you around the city today." Morrison shook the woman's hand. Her grip was strong, stronger than it should have been for someone her size. "A pleasure to meet you, Captain," Harper said. Her voice was calm and controlled. "Are you ready to see what humanity has accomplished?" Morrison nodded. He wanted to understand this new world, even if part of him was afraid of what he might learn. They took a transport that moved without making any sound. It floated above the streets, controlled by invisible forces. Through the windows, Morrison could see people walking on the sidewalks below. They all moved with the same smooth coordination he had noticed in the docking bay. "The first thing you should understand," Harper said as they traveled, "is that everything you see was built for a purpose. We don't waste resources on decoration or comfort. Every building, every street, every system serves the goal of making humanity stronger." Morrison looked at the buildings they passed. They were beautiful in a cold way, all clean lines and glowing materials. But there were no parks, no flowers, no places where children might play just for fun. "What about families?" Morrison asked. "Where do people live?" "We have residential sectors," Harper replied. "Housing is assigned based on job function and genetic compatibility. Children are raised in educational centers where they can learn efficiently." Morrison felt a chill. "Educational centers? What happened to families raising their own children?" Carter spoke up from the front of the transport. "Captain, we learned that traditional family structures were inefficient. Children raised in group settings develop better social skills and learn faster. They become better citizens." The transport stopped at a large building made of white stone and metal. Harper led them inside, and Morrison found himself in a museum. The walls were covered with displays showing the history of humanity's war against the Kithrans. The first displays showed the attack on Earth. Morrison recognized some of the images from the news reports he had watched on the Defiance. But as they moved through the museum, the story became something he did not remember. "After the initial Kithran attack," Harper explained, "our scientists studied the enemy ships and weapons. We learned that the Kithrans were not the real threat. They were tools, created by a much larger civilization to test us." Morrison stopped in front of a display showing Kithran prisoners in cages. The insect-like aliens looked smaller and weaker than he remembered. "Created by whom?" Morrison asked. "The Dominion," Carter said. "A galaxy-spanning empire that has existed for millions of years. They use other species to test potential threats. If a species proves dangerous, the Dominion destroys them. If a species proves useful, they are enslaved." The next section of the museum showed human ships attacking Kithran worlds. Morrison watched videos of entire planets being bombed until nothing lived on the surface. "We decided that the best defense was a strong offense," Harper said. "We tracked down every Kithran colony, every ship, every individual. We eliminated the threat completely." Morrison stared at images of dead Kithran cities. "You killed all of them?" "Every last one," Carter said with satisfaction. "It took 40 years, but we made sure they could never threaten humanity again." They moved to the next section, which showed other alien species. Morrison counted at least 20 different types of creatures, all displayed like hunting trophies. "These are the other species we've encountered," Harper explained. "Some tried to attack us, others simply had resources or technology we needed. We dealt with each threat appropriately." Morrison realized what he was looking at. These were not just displays of defeated enemies. These were records of genocide. Humanity had not just defended itself. It had become a conquering force that destroyed entire civilizations. "How many?" Morrison asked quietly. "How many what?" Harper replied. "How many species have you destroyed?" Carter and Harper exchanged a look. 37 so far, Carter said. "But that number will grow. The galaxy is full of threats to humanity." They left the museum and walked through the city streets. Morrison noticed that the people they passed all looked healthy and strong. Their clothes were clean and well-made. They moved with purpose, like soldiers on duty even when they were just walking to work. But something was missing. Morrison watched for several minutes before he realized what it was. No one was laughing. No one looked happy or sad or angry. They all wore the same calm expression, like masks that never changed. "Colonel Harper," Morrison said, "what happened to human emotions? Everyone here seems so controlled." Harper smiled, but the expression did not reach her eyes. "We learned that strong emotions make people unpredictable. Anger leads to poor decisions. Fear makes people weak. Love makes them selfish. We developed treatments to help people control these impulses." Treatments? Genetic modifications and behavioral conditioning. Everyone receives them as children. It makes society more stable and efficient. Morrison stopped walking. "You're talking about changing what makes people human." "We're talking about making people better," Carter said. "The old humanity was chaotic and weak. We almost went extinct because we couldn't work together effectively. The new humanity is stronger, smarter, and more unified." They visited a school next. Morrison watched children sitting in perfect rows, learning about military tactics and alien biology. The teacher showed them how to calculate the most efficient way to destroy an enemy planet. The children took notes and asked technical questions, but none of them seemed excited or curious about what they were learning. "These children will become our next generation of leaders," Harper said proudly. "They will continue humanity's expansion across the galaxy." Morrison watched a little girl, maybe 8 years old, raise her hand to ask about chemical weapons. She spoke in the same calm, controlled voice as the adults. "Don't you think they should learn about art or music or literature?" Morrison asked. "Those things serve no practical purpose," Harper replied. "We need citizens who can think clearly and act decisively. Art and music are distractions from more important goals." They returned to the transport and traveled to the edge of the city. Here Morrison could see construction crews building new sections. The workers moved in perfect coordination, like parts of a machine. Giant robots helped them, lifting materials. That would have taken dozens of people to move. "Everything you see," Carter said, "was built in the last 70 years. When your ship left Earth, this planet had 500,000 people living in small farming communities. Now we have 200 million people living in the most advanced civilization humanity has ever created." Morrison had to admit it was impressive, but it was also frightening. "What about the people from my ship?" Morrison asked. "What happens to them?" "They have a choice," Harper said. "They can undergo the same treatments that all citizens receive. Genetic modification to make them stronger and healthier. Mental conditioning to help them think more clearly. In 6 months, they will be full citizens of New Geneva. And if they refuse?" Carter's expression hardened slightly. "Then they will be relocated to a preserve world where they can live as they choose. But they will not be allowed to interfere with our society or our mission." Morrison understood. It was not really a choice at all. Join the new humanity or be exiled to live on a reservation like animals in a zoo. That evening, Morrison sat in his quarters and thought about everything he had seen. The people of New Geneva had survived and thrived, but they had paid a terrible price for their success. They had given up everything that made them human in order to become something more efficient. He thought about his crew and the refugees on the Defiance. They were tired and scared and broken, but they were still human in all the messy, chaotic ways that made life worth living. Outside his window, the perfect city of Hamilton glowed in the darkness. Ships moved through the sky in precise patterns. Everything worked exactly as it was supposed to work, but Morrison found himself missing the broken-down corridors of the Defiance, where people laughed and cried and argued and loved each other despite their fears. He had to decide what was more important, survival or humanity itself. Captain Jake Morrison could not sleep. He stood at his window looking out at the city below. The streets were empty now, but light still moved through the sky. Ships coming and going at all hours, carrying out missions he did not understand. Soft chime came from his door. Morrison opened it to find Admiral Ryan Carter standing in the hallway. "Captain, we need to talk. There are things you need to see." Morrison followed Carter through corridors he had not walked before. They went deeper into the station, past areas marked with symbols Morrison did not recognize. Finally, They reached a door that opened only after Carter placed his hand on a scanner. "This is our command center," Carter said as they entered. The room was enormous. The walls were covered with screens showing star maps and ship movements. Dozens of people worked at stations monitoring information that flowed across the displays like water. But what caught Morrison's attention was the map in the center of the room. It showed the entire galaxy. Large sections were colored blue, marking human territory. Morrison had never seen anything like it. When he left Earth, humanity controlled maybe 20 star systems. Now the blue areas covered thousands of systems. "How is this possible?" Morrison asked. Carter walked to the central display. "Captain, I told you that we defeated the Kithrans, but I did not tell you the whole story." The display changed to show a timeline. Morrison could see the Kithran attack on Earth, then the battles at New Geneva. But the timeline continued far beyond what Carter had told him before. "After we captured Kithran technology, we learned something important," Carter continued. "The Kithrans were not acting alone. They were servants of something much larger and more dangerous. Images appeared showing massive ships unlike anything Morrison had ever seen. They were kilometers long and seemed to be made of living metal that shifted and moved. "The Dominion," Carter said. "They have ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They use younger species as tools to test potential threats. The Kithrans were sent to see if humanity was dangerous enough to require elimination." Morrison watched as the images showed Dominion ships arriving at distant worlds. Entire civilizations disappeared in moments, reduced to dust by weapons that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. "When we destroyed the Kithran fleet, we sent a message to the Dominion," Carter explained. "We told them that humanity would not go quietly into extinction." "What did they do?" "Nothing at first. They waited and watched. But we did not wait. We knew they would come eventually, so we prepared." The timeline showed humanity's expansion across the galaxy, ships moving from system to system, establishing colonies and mining operations. But Morrison could see that it was not just expansion, it was conquest. "We found other species," Carter said. "Some were friendly, others were hostile, but all of them had something we needed." Morrison watched as human fleets attacked world after world. The pattern was always the same. Human ships would arrive, demand surrender, and then take whatever they wanted. Populations that resisted were destroyed. Those that submitted were enslaved or relocated. "You conquered the entire galaxy," Morrison said. "We did what was necessary to survive," Carter replied. "Each species we encountered taught us something new. The Zalathi had advanced shield technology. The Corvan knew how to build ships that could travel faster than light without using hyperspace. The Threnodi could manipulate matter at the atomic level." Morrison saw the pattern now. Humanity had not just been expanding. They had been collecting technologies and resources from every species they encountered, building themselves into something more powerful than anyone in the galaxy. "What happened to all these species?" Morrison asked. Carter's expression did not change. "Some joined us willingly and became part of human civilization. Others were relocated to worlds where they could live peacefully under our protection. The rest—" He did not finish the sentence. Morrison understood. The rest had been eliminated. The display changed again, showing more recent events. Morrison could see massive fleets of human ships moving toward the center of the galaxy. 3 years ago, the Dominion finally decided we had become too dangerous to ignore, Carter said. They sent their primary fleet to destroy us. Morrison watched the battle unfold on the screen. Thousands of ships on both sides, weapons that could destroy stars, battles that lasted for months. But slowly, the human forces began to win. How? Morrison asked. If they were so powerful, how did you defeat them? Because we learned something they never expected, Carter said with satisfaction. We learned that they were not invincible. They had ruled for so long that they forgot how to adapt. They used the same tactics, the same weapons, the same strategies they had used for millions of years. The timeline showed the final battle. Human ships surrounded a massive structure at the center of the galaxy, something that looked like a metal planet covered in weapons. Their central command, Carter explained. The brain that controlled their entire empire. When we destroyed it, every Dominion ship in the galaxy stopped working. Every automated defense system shut down. In one moment, we went from fighting for survival to ruling the galaxy. Morrison stared at the display. When did this happen? 6 months ago. The war is over, Captain. Humanity won. Morrison felt dizzy. While he and his crew had been struggling to keep their ship together, humanity had been fighting and winning a war for control of the entire galaxy. What happens now? Morrison asked. Carter touched the display, and it showed current ship movements. Morrison could see human fleets patrolling every sector of the galaxy, establishing control over systems that had belonged to the Dominion for millions of years. Now we consolidate our victory, Carter said. There are still pockets of resistance, species that refuse to accept human authority, worlds that try to hide from our scouts. But we will find them all eventually. Morrison looked at the map again. Every blue area represented systems under human control, but he could see other colors too. Red areas that were marked as contested, and gray areas marked as unconfirmed. How many people live in human space now? Morrison asked. Approximately 400 billion humans, Carter replied, plus another 2 trillion members of species that have accepted integration into our society. Morrison tried to process the number. When he left Earth, the total human population had been about 8 billion people. That's impossible. How did the population grow so fast? Genetic engineering, Carter said simply. We can grow a human from conception to adulthood in 5 years now. We can also extend lifespans indefinitely. Most of our original colonists are still alive after 70 years, and they will live for centuries more. Morrison realized he was looking at the end of humanity as he had known it. These people had the same DNA, but they were something else, entirely. They lived longer, grew faster, thought differently, and felt nothing about conquering entire civilizations. Admiral Carter, Morrison said carefully, what is humanity's goal now? You control the galaxy. What comes next? Carter smiled, and for the first time Morrison saw genuine emotion in his eyes. It was ambition, pure and cold. The galaxy is just the beginning, Captain. Our scientists have detected signals from other galaxies. There are civilizations out there that make the Dominion look primitive. Eventually they will notice us and decide we are a threat. Carter pointed to areas beyond the edge of the galactic map. When that happens, we will be ready. We will do to them what we did to the Dominion, and then we will move on to the next galaxy, and the next until there is nothing left in the universe that can threaten humanity. Morrison looked around the command center. The people working at their stations showed no reaction to Carter's words. They accepted the idea of conquering the entire universe, as casually as someone might accept a weather report. And if species in those other galaxies are peaceful? Morrison asked. What if they pose no threat? Carter's smile disappeared. Captain, we learned an important lesson from our war with the Kithrans. There is no such thing as a species that poses no threat. Every civilization will eventually become dangerous if it is allowed to grow and develop. The only way to ensure humanity's safety is to make sure we are the only advanced species in the universe. Morrison felt sick. He was looking at the ultimate result of humanity's survival instinct. They had become so focused on eliminating threats that they could not imagine a universe where different species could coexist peacefully. What about my people? Morrison asked. The refugees from the Defiance? That depends on them, Carter replied. And on you, Captain. You have a choice to make. You can join us and help guide humanity's expansion across the universe. Or you can refuse and watch from the sidelines as we create a better future for our species. Carter turned toward the door. Think about it, Captain. But remember, this war is bigger than Earth, bigger than the Kithrans, bigger than anything you experienced during your journey. This is about the survival of humanity in a universe full of threats we have not even discovered yet. As Carter left, Morrison remained standing in front of the galactic map. He could see the scope of what humanity had accomplished. They had gone from near extinction to galactic dominance in just 70 years. But looking at all that blue territory, Morrison could not help wondering how many species had died to create this empire. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the observation deck of the space station, looking down at his ship. The Defiance looked different now. The repair systems had fixed all the damage, sealed the hull breaches, and replaced the broken parts. It was beautiful again, like it had been when it first left Earth 3 years ago. But Morrison knew it would never fly again. There was nowhere left to run. Behind him, he could hear his crew talking quietly among themselves. They had all seen the city, met the people, learned the truth about what humanity had become. Now they had to decide what to do about it. "Captain," said Lisa Grant, his communications officer, "the Admiral is here." Morrison turned to see Admiral Ryan Carter walking toward them. With him were several other officers Morrison had not met before. They all had the same calm expressions and cold eyes. "Captain Morrison," Carter said, "have you made your decision?" Morrison looked at his crew. They were all watching him, waiting to see what their captain would choose. These people had followed him across the galaxy, trusted him to keep them alive when everything seemed hopeless. Now he had to decide their fate. "Admiral Carter," Morrison said, "I need to understand something first. You said the war with the Dominion ended 6 months ago. Why did you wait for us? You could have declared victory and moved on." Carter nodded. "A good question. The truth is, Captain, we need you." "Need us for what?" Carter gestured to one of the officers with him, a woman with short black hair and silver eyes. "This is Dr. Linda Ross, our chief behavioral scientist. She can explain better than I can." Dr. Ross stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was as controlled as everyone else's, but Morrison detected something underneath it. Something that might have been regret. "Captain Morrison," she said, "the genetic modifications and mental conditioning that our people undergo are very effective. They make us stronger, smarter, and more efficient, but they also remove something important." "What do you mean?" "Creativity, innovation, the ability to think in new ways. Our people are excellent at following plans and executing strategies, but they struggle to develop original ideas." Morrison began to understand. "You turned yourselves into a very effective army, but you lost the ability to adapt." "Exactly," Carter said. "For 70 years, this was not a problem. We were fighting enemies who used predictable tactics. But now that we control the galaxy, we need to plan for threats we cannot predict. We need people who can think in ways our modified humans cannot." Dr. Ross continued, "We have been waiting for refugee ships like yours because you represent the last examples of unmodified humanity. You still have all the chaotic, unpredictable qualities that we removed from ourselves." Morrison felt a chill. "You want to study us?" "We want to work with you," Carter corrected. "Our scientists believe that by combining the discipline of modified humans with the creativity of original humans, we can create the perfect leadership class for humanity's future expansion." Morrison looked at his crew again. They all looked as uncomfortable as he felt. "And if we refuse?" Morrison asked. Carter's expression hardened slightly. "Then you will be relocated to a preserve world. As I mentioned before, you will be comfortable there, but you will play no role in humanity's future." Morrison understood the real choice: join the new humanity and help them conquer the universe, or be put away like museum pieces while the galaxy burned around them. "Can I see this preserve world?" Morrison asked. Carter seemed surprised by the request, but he nodded. "Of course. Dr. Ross can show you." An hour later, Morrison found himself on a transport ship traveling to a planet called Haven. Dr. Ross sat across from him, looking out the window at the stars. "Dr. Ross," Morrison said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret what humanity has become?" For a moment, Dr. Ross's controlled expression slipped. Morrison saw something in her eyes that looked almost human. "I remember what I was like before the modifications," she said quietly. "I used to laugh at silly jokes. I used to cry during sad movies. I used to fall in love with people who were completely wrong for me. And now? Now I understand that those emotions were inefficient and counterproductive. I am better without them. But the way she said it made Morrison think she did not really believe her own words. Haven turned out to be a beautiful planet, covered in green forests and blue oceans. The transport landed near a small city that looked almost like the Earth cities Morrison remembered from before the war. This is where the unmodified humans live, Dr. Ross explained as they walked through the streets. We have about 50,000 people here from various refugee ships that arrived over the past 70 years. Morrison saw children playing in parks, couples holding hands, old people sitting on benches feeding birds. Everyone looked relaxed and happy, but there was something sad about it too. They were living in a zoo, preserved like endangered animals. They seem content, Morrison said. They are. We provide everything they need: food, shelter, medical care, entertainment. They are free to live however they choose, as long as they stay on this planet. Morrison watched a group of teenagers playing music on a street corner. Their song was messy and chaotic, nothing like the perfect compositions he had heard on New Geneva. But it was full of life and emotion. Dr. Ross, Morrison said, what happens when these people die? When there are no more unmodified humans left? Dr. Ross stopped walking. That is why we need you, Captain. These people are content to live simple lives, but they have no interest in helping us solve the problems of galactic leadership. You and your crew are different. You have military training and leadership experience. Morrison realized that this was the real choice. He could let his people live peaceful lives on Haven until they died out, or he could help the new humanity become even more efficient at conquest. That evening, Morrison sat with his senior officers in a house that had been prepared for them on Haven. Outside, they could hear people talking and laughing in the streets. What do you think, Captain? Asked Chief Engineer Danny Walsh. It's not such a bad place to retire. Is that what you want? Morrison asked. To retire? I want to stop running, said Dr. Kate Phillips. I want to help people without worrying about running out of medicine or watching the ship fall apart around us. But what about the rest of the galaxy? Asked Lisa Grant. What about all the species that humanity is conquering? Don't we have a responsibility to try to change things? Morrison had been thinking the same thing. Maybe he could not stop humanity's expansion, but maybe he could influence how it happened. Maybe he could help them remember what it meant to be human. There's something else to consider, Morrison said. Admiral Carter told me that they've detected signals from other galaxies. They're planning to expand beyond our galaxy eventually. The room became quiet. Everyone was thinking about what that meant. Captain, Danny said, do you think we can actually change their minds about anything? They've been doing this for 70 years. They're not going to listen to a bunch of refugees from a dead planet. Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, human fleets were patrolling systems that had once belonged to other species. Maybe we can't change their minds, Morrison said, but maybe we can change their children's minds. Dr. Ross said they need our creativity and unpredictability. Maybe we can use that to teach them something better, or maybe we'll just help them become more efficient killers, Lisa said quietly. Morrison knew she was right. There was no guarantee that working with the new humanity would make them any better. It might just make them more dangerous. The next morning, Admiral Carter arrived on Haven to hear Morrison's decision. Captain, Carter said, what will it be? Morrison looked at his crew one last time. They were all watching him, trusting him to make the right choice. Admiral Carter, Morrison said, I'll work with you. But I have conditions. Carter raised an eyebrow. What conditions? My people get to choose for themselves whether to undergo your modifications or not. Those who choose to stay unmodified get to visit their families on Haven whenever they want. And I want to be involved in planning for future expansion. Carter considered this for a moment. Agreed. But understand, Captain, that you will be working to secure humanity's future in a dangerous universe. That may require difficult decisions. Morrison nodded. I understand. As Carter left, Morrison wondered if he had made the right choice. He was about to help humanity conquer the universe, but maybe that was better than watching from the sidelines while they did it anyway. Maybe the only way to preserve any part of the old humanity was to work within the new humanity and try to guide it toward something better.